All right, just talk to me a little bit now. I want to do a sound check on
Well, my earliest remembrances of childhood in Montgomery, Alabama, and we used to have certain things, you know, back in those days, people all had party lines. And I can still remember our telephone number, 735J. And we used to get on the phone and we'd call the taxi company, you know, and order a taxi for the next door neighbor. And then we would all go out front and watch till the taxi came and went up and found out that no one wanted a taxi. And then we used to call people on the phone and say, is your home on the streetcar line? And they'd say yes. Well, you better get it off, the streetcar's coming. All those were sharp. And then also back in those days, you know, they had Prince Albert smoking tobacco, and they had it in a can, and we'd call and ask the store, you know, do you have Prince Albert in a can? And they'd say yes. Well, you better let him out. Well, those were real sharp tricks, you know. But then when I was in school at Auburn University, we were all very good fellows. We didn't pull a lot of stunts, you know. We lived right across the street where I lived in a boarding house. It was right across the street from the railroad station. And it was a crack train that used to come through there that would stop every night. And I didn't have any part in this, but these fellows used to go over and grease the railroad tracks. And when the train would stop, you know, and then try to start it, it'd spin its wheels, you know, and it'd have an awful time getting it going. And,
But you had nothing to do with it.
I had nothing to do with that. We also, we had a boarding house there we had a real long table. It was, I guess as long as from here to the back of that patio. And it was a fellow that sat down at the far end and always told these jokes that weren't funny at all. And these fellows sat down at that end would tell us about it. So we had rigged up a game that when he told a story that was supposed to be funny, that one fellow would give us a signal and everybody down on the far end would laugh and nobody around him would laugh. Well, he did that 3 or 4 times and I don't know if he finally caught on or not, but he quit telling those funny stories. And then there was a boy there that no one seemed to like. He was kind of stuck on himself, you know. And he had a Volkswagen car. Well, across the street at the railroad station, they had a sort of a statue right in the middle of the outside the station, and there was a big stone thing up on top of it. And one time, fellows went over and took his Volkswagen, and all of them together lifted it up and set it up on top of this big rock. Well, he finally got it down, but he had to get some friends to come and help him.
So where were you that night? Helping lift it?
I had nothing to do with any of these things. And one that Dan Duncan told on me that I can't say that I remember it, but we had an old maid school teacher that was a librarian, and she wanted absolute silence in the library. And this happened that she had a little alarm clock that sat on her desk, you know, and when she was off doing some work or something, somebody would take that alarm clock and wind it up and take it back in the stacks back there and set it to go off in about 5 minutes and go back and meekly sit at the table and study. Well, that alarm would go off and the old lady would about have a fit trying to find where the alarm clock was in. And that worked several times. I didn't have anything to do with that either.
You never got caught. You know a lot of stories that you didn't have anything to do with.
Well, those are a few things that happened at Auburn University. And then when I went to school at Ohio State, Chetrick, a friend of mine, and we had a down at the far end, one end, and some guys in the chemistry department were way down at the far end of the hall, and they were doing research work, but they always left the door open, glass door, and we had these little glass pellets, and we'd get a glass tube that was big enough to put the pellets in, and we turn all the lights off, you know, and the lights were usually dark all down the hall, but these guys would be in the room working, you know, and we'd shoot those glass pellets all the way down the hall, and they'd bounce off the door and into the lab. And these guys would come to the door, "We know who you are, we're going to report you." We would have the door closed and everything was dark, so they didn't know we was doing it. Yeah. Well, I used to work in a lab late at night, and we would be doing our experiments or whatever we were working on. And so one night I came home, and it was pretty late, and everybody just about was in bed. And I went in my room, and I had a bed that was just almost like a single cot. And somebody had brought a dog in from outside, and that dog was peacefully laying in my bed with his head on the pillow, sound asleep. And the rascal wouldn't even want to get out and let me get in. So I don't know who did that. I suspected the fellows down the hall. They were in bed asleep. So I took the dog, went down the hall with him, and I put him in the room real quietly, and I poured some water on the floor, and I shut the door. Well, when they woke up the next morning, they were complaining about this dog had wet their floor. And it served them right, you know, for what they did.
They were probably just getting revenge from jokes you had played on them, right?
Did you turn your pillow over after the dog lay on?
Well, I don't remember, but I probably did. A fellow named Jack Teagard and I roomed together, and we used to go and buy our meals, go to the grocery store, and we'd all pitch in a certain amount of money. And Jack Teagard, he was the cook, and he did most of the buying. And Dan Duncan, he lived over in a different home, but he'd come over and there was about 4 or 5 of us that ate together, fixed our own meals. And there was another fellow that he was a kind of went the Jack Teagard's sister. This fellow was going with her, and they were eventually going to get married. Well, one time there was an alleyway in between, but our windows were almost straight across. And this fella came, knocked on the window, you know, we all went to the window, and he stood there looking, and Dan took a great big handful of mashed potatoes, threw it across the alleyway and hit him right in the face.
Oh my,
And,
this is all news to me too.
I don't think he cared for that.
But you were watching. You were present.
Well, that was just some of the things that happened. Well, after I graduated, I worked in Montgomery for a while because it was very hard to find a job then. And I worked for the highway department for quite a while. And anyway, later on that year, a friend of ours got me a job in New Orleans at the West New Orleans Snowdrift Company, which was across the river in Gretna, Louisiana. And so I worked down there for a couple of years in New Orleans. And when it would rain, back then they didn't have any provisions for the water that came over the levee, and I was working over in Gretna, Louisiana, across the river, and they had a flood. It just poured down rain, and and the river came up and came over the levee and down into the city of New Orleans. And so it rained so hard that I was able to come back across the river on the ferry boat, but the water was knee-deep, and all the transportation was stopped. So I had to walk all the way home from there, and it was a long distance from where I lived to where I had to get this ferry boat to go across the river. But now they have put in something that drains the water to Lake Pontchartrain. And they don't have these floods that come up over the levee and fill the city like they did then. Well, I can't think of any more good stories.
Take a drink while you get a question here.
Now, tell some of your stories about your travels from Ohio State back home. I remember a couple stories like that.
Oh, when I worked in New Orleans, I bought an old
Is
car.
that wet?
Huh?
Is that glass wet
No.
on the bottom?
I don't know. I bought an old car. I think I paid $75 for it. It was a real good car, but I bought it in New Orleans and never thought anything about driving it anywhere but the good climate, you know. Well, after I left New Orleans, I came back to Montgomery and I worked there about 6 months or so. And then Dan Duncan, my good friend, had gone up to Ohio State, and he wanted me to come up there. Well, he finally persuaded me, and I decided to go up there and go to school for graduate work. But I started out in this old car, and I never thought of it too much, but I don't know what month it was, but it must have been getting in the fall or December or October or somewhere, because when I was coming up through Kentucky, they didn't have I-75 or anything like that then. It was a real curvy, narrow road through Kentucky. And as I got up in Kentucky, it started snowing. And it just really came down. And I must have had angels pushing my car, because I didn't even have a heater in the car. And my windshield wiper didn't work too good, so I was driving with my head out the window like this, and the snow coming down. And it really snowed, you know, quite a bit. And my tires weren't that good. But anyhow, I just kept going, kept moving, and somehow I made it up to Columbus. And for a while I kept that car, and somebody rented me a garage for a tremendous sum. I think it was $5 a month. Anyway, I finally sold that car. Didn't have one for a while. But then later on, I did buy another car. I think I paid a lot of money for it. It was something like $175. And we made several trips. Dan Duncan and another friend that lived in Florida. They would ride. Dan lived in northern Alabama, and he would ride down from Columbus, and I would drop him off at his home, and then I would drive on to Montgomery. Well, one time we were driving down through Tennessee on one of those trips, and again we were having bad weather. Only this time it was icy roads, and Dan was sitting back like this, and he was sound asleep. And I was going down the hill, and I started making circles going down the hill, and somebody was coming uphill. I don't know how we missed each other. He zigged when I zagged or something, but I went over to the edge of the road, and I slapped on the brakes, and I stopped my car right at the ditch. And just about that time, Dan woke up, and he pulled out a pack of gum and said, "Have a piece of gum." I don't think he realized what happened. We made several trips like that. And one time, coming back from Montgomery, I was going to pick Dan up at his home. I had trouble with the car, and I had to have it repaired in Birmingham, and that took all the money that I had. But I came by Dan's, and it was free. It must have been, I think it was $0 below. And this other guy, see, what was his name? Can't think of it right offhand, but he was a little guy. And we had to spend the night. And the only heat they had a huge fireplace downstairs in the living room. That was the main heat, but upstairs it wasn't heated. And we had to go upstairs to go to bed. And we got in those sheets, they were ice cold. I froze to death. But anyway, the next morning, we got up and we started, Dan and this other guy and I, George Huey, that was his name, George Huey. And he had on a black hat, he was carrying a briefcase, little guy. And we started out the next morning and we got up to Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, and the car broke down. And it was a busted piston. And we had made it to a filling station. We got in that filling station and the guy that worked there, he was a young fella, and he was a mechanic. And so we thought we'd have to have the thing repaired, you know. And so they also had a little store there. We went in the store and there was a bunch of old guys sitting around. One of them was chewing tobacco, just running down like this, you know. And and we kept calling George Reverend because when that briefcase, that black hat, we thought he looked like a preacher, you know. And this old man said with the tobacco, he says, "Hey, you're a preacher?" He says, "I'm a preacher too." And those people were real nice. They saw this fellow said he'd have to go over to a junkyard and see if he could buy a piston for the car, and he would come back and work on it. And he worked on it all night long. And we were sitting around the store though before then, and this old guy with the tobacco stains, he says, "Some of you guys can come and stay with me," he says. And Dan says, "Well, I think the preachers ought to stay together." So anyway, these people put us up for the night, but he didn't go to the preacher's house. We all three of us had to sleep in one bed. And little George Huey was in the middle, and the bed sagged, and we rolled in on him like this, you know. But anyway, they put us up for the night, and the next morning, we got to wrestling around, and we kicked George Huey out of bed, and he got up and put that black hat on, and he had on long underwear, and he was strutting around the room like that, and this lady stuck her head in and said, "Breakfast is ready." And he had to dive for cover. And
Well, didn't you all boost him out of bed?
and so anyway, we went on the next day. We were all out of money, and we got ready to pay our bill, and we had to get some gas, and I think gas was something like 16 cents a gallon back in those days. And I think I had about $8, and so all of us put our money in together. And this fellow, that's all he charged us, was whatever we could pay him. He took that for doing all that repair work on the car, and they filled our tank up with gas. And I'd like to know who those people were, because they really treated us nice.
Huh.
And then, so we drove on then, and Dan had an uncle in Nashville who was a doctor. And he said, "You know, it's the first time I ever stopped to see my uncle, and I got to borrow some money from him." So he went to see his uncle, and he borrowed some money. And with that, we were able to get back to Columbus and get finished. And when I was working in New Orleans, that was before I went back to graduate school. I ate at a boarding house there too, and we had one man named Mr. Goodrich. He and I later moved out and had an apartment where we had rooms across from each other. But at the time there was an old lady that lived there, and her daughter was like an old maid school teacher herself. She was probably in her 40s, you know. But her mother was real protective of her. Anywhere she went, if she had a date or anything, her mother went along too. And anyway, I didn't mean to to get anybody in trouble, but it was Valentine's Day, and I bought all these insulting Valentines, and sent each one of them one, you know. And boy, this old lady, she really got insulted, and she thought she knew who did it. She was blaming it on one of this other guy that lived in the house, you know. Well, they never found out who did it, but she used to have a little poodle that she would take for a walk, and this Valentine, it had this old lady walking down the street with a poodle, you know, and she just knew that this guy had sent that Valentine to her.
How'd you find out? Did she tell you?
Yeah, oh, she was mad. Yeah. But that's about all the stories I can think of for right offhand.
Do you ever have any run-ins with the law?
With the law, no.
They never caught up with you for practical jokes, or?
I'll tell you, one time we almost got in trouble. It was that first car I had, the $75 job. It had a gear shift on the floor where it went into the floor like that. You had to shift gears. And one time we were starting out, so we got down to Cincinnati, and we were going through Cincinnati. You had to go across the bridge, and the traffic was terrible. And anyway, I started to go across the bridge, and I started this gear shift, and it come up in my hand like this. And I didn't know what to do with it. Van took it and he stuck it back down in there, and it seemed to work. But we went across the river, and we got tied up in traffic, and we came around. We went back to Cincinnati, and we went back around the bridge, and this policeman kept looking at us. He knew he'd seen us before. I think we made about 3 trips around before we could get in the right lane and get going. But that gear shift just came right up in my hand. It came loose from the floor. You got any more stories?
It's about when you and Aunt Nellie was,
Oh, now this was when I was still, I think, a teenager or something. And I used to stay with my Aunt Nellie and Uncle Sam quite a bit. And she was always real nervous, but she wanted to learn to drive. And they had an old Essex car back then. And she got where I'd go with her, she could drive around the block, you know, and drive around the block. So, sometimes when she'd come around the block, she'd want to stop, and she didn't know what to do. And I'd say, put your brake on, and that'll stop, you know. But she was real nervous. Well, we were down in Florida one time, and she was driving, just she and I think. We were in a car, and we were down in Florida, and most of the land down there is flat, you know. But this had a slight slope to it, and it was going to a 1-lane bridge. And back in those days, these cars had what they call freewheeling. And if you had the freewheeling on, it was just like it was out of gear, you know. The motor wouldn't stop it, it'd just get going. And we were going down this little hill, and we were going to this 1-lane bridge, and we kept going faster and faster and faster as we approached the bridge, and she says, I can't make it. I said, yes, you can. We shot through that bridge and out the other side. Luckily, nobody was coming. She made it. But she got nervous, and she didn't know to put a brake on or anything. She just went right through there. So I said, yes, you can.
That'd be scary.
And Uncle Sam he took us down to Florida after Addis and I got married. And Sam was with us once, and we had rented a cabin there, and we'd have to go over to the beach. We had to drive to the
when
beach.
he took us, he rented a place over at Panama City Beach.
Yeah, well, we were close to the beach then. But they had some old ladies upstairs, and they were all, you could hear them clomping around up there, you know, and Uncle Sam would take the broom and have a clutch up on the ceiling, you know, those old biddies up there, you know. He tried to do that to get them to quiet down. And I remember that time, wasn't the flies so bad there? flies were
Oh,
biting.
yes, they called them dog flies.
Yeah, when the wind blew a certain way, it'd bring these flies in, and the flies were so bad you couldn't stay on the beach anytime because the flies would bite you so bad.
Ooh, and anything you'd spray on you, it didn't do any good.
Don't
They
Sam
said
and
they go
Nell,
away with the wind.
they love to fish, and they'd take me down to what they call dead lakes, Florida, and go fishing. And I'd get so tired sitting in the boat, but I had a pole and Aunt Nellie had a pole, and one time she'd go to throw hers and I'd go to throw mine, and the lines got all tangled up together, you know, and Uncle Sam then would have to stop and try to get those things untangled.
Tell about I think this was when you were at Auburn, about the pancakes and somebody put something inside one of them.
Where was that?
I don't know, I think it was at Auburn, wasn't it? I don't know for sure where it was, but didn't you say that somebody put a piece of flannel
I
and
need a flannel, yes,
Yeah.
somebody did that at that boarding house, but I don't know who did that. They put a piece of flannel inside this guy's pancake, whoever got it, you know, he went to cut it, of course, he couldn't. I did a dirty trick one time, though. We working in a lab, you could generate hydrogen sulfide by taking a little sodium sulfide and putting a little acid on it, you know, and it spilled awful. And for a while I did that. I'd get like just a top off of a Coke bottle or something, you know, put a little of that in there and put dab acid and put it on somebody's bed up under the rail, you know, like it. And they would come in and it smelled awful. And, that was a dirty trick.
That was a dirty trick. And they couldn't find it, I guess.
Eventually it would just wear off, you know. So,
What about when you worked at Procter and Gamble? Surely you played practical jokes on each other there.
let's see, I can't remember too much about playing jokes at Procter and Gamble. I know there was one time that a fellow got on the elevator, and it was one of these open things that had a door you just raise up, you know. And the fellows let him get down halfway between the two floors and then stopped the elevator, and he was in there with it halfway down, and then they got a hose and sprayed water down on him while he was trapped in the elevator. I can't remember. Can't remember any bad tricks there.
well, tell us how it came about that you and Mother got together, or you met.
Well, there was a fellow that worked for me at Procter & Gamble, and he also worked for Annis's brother in the restaurant out there at Milford. And he brought me out to Milford with him one time, and they had a friend named Francis that was into wax, and I think he brought me out to meet Francis. And but I met Annis, and so Francis kind of got lost in the shuffle, I guess. Anyway,
Elmo wanted Francis to meet you.
you know, they had brought me out there to meet Frances, who was into wax or something. She was
But
about
Bunny
to-
brought you out there to meet me.
Yeah. So that's the way it worked out anyway.
We have a request from Carol.
Well, you can decline to tell this story if you choose. But could you tell us what this stands for? TT?
TTNLOB.
Well, this is something that happened with Sam. My brother Sam was up here visiting us. And it just so happened that I guess I must have had beans to eat or something. And we went to a store, I think it was
That
Elder
was
Beerman.
Swifton.
Was it Elder Beerman or something down in
That was
Swifton?
Swifton.
And occasionally the gas would build up and I would release a little bit of it, you know, and Sam kept saying, who is that, you know, and about that time I saw the two colored boys over there, and I said, it's the two nasty little old buzzards. And he thought it really was. It wasn't until, I guess, just a few years ago that I told him that those two nasty little old buzzards, it wasn't them, it was me.
Did he remember it?
He thought it was those two nasty little old buzzards. Well, I hope it took.
You need to look that way, not at the camera.
Jennifer told you about that email we got from Warren, didn't she?
Yeah.
About that lady saying that Bailey went on her leg.
Oh, he did?
Huh?
He did?
But they figured later on that he'd just gotten a drink out of his water saucer where his face was wet or something, and he just burst his bar or something. But he said it was very embarrassing at first.
You told us a story one time about an evangelist, and that's when you came into the church. You want to tell that story again?
About what?
An evangelist?
Oh, evangelist
Duffield.
Duffield and Schaefer. They had meetings downtown Cincinnati, and at the time we had 4 girls. We had Linda and Carol, and then we had my 2 little girls of my sisters, and they stayed with us about 6 months, didn't they?
Yeah.
Well, we went all the way downtown to go to these evangelistic meetings, and we went every night. I don't think we missed a single night, did we?
Only when you had to go out of town, and I thought, well, that'll be the end of that.
Anyway, these fellows held their meetings, and then they would come out to the house to visit us. And in fact, on Sabbath afternoon one time, we went to Winton Woods Park, I think, but they were, and I had a dream about that time, and I dreamed that these fellows came to the house, and that I shook hands with them, and one of them had his thumb cut off. And I had never noticed that, but when he actually came, and I shook hands, Schaefer did have his thumb cut off, and I have never noticed it. But when I dreamed it, I dreamed that he had his thumb cut off, and when he actually came, it turned out that way. And as a result of those meetings, and Ruth and George were living in Cincinnati for a while, we would go to church with them, and so that led to our baptism.
Uh,
How did you know about the meetings to start with?
They sent
Well-
real nice invitations out, and of course it didn't say who it was, but I figured out that it was them. So on this Sunday evening, we went out to eat, And I asked him if he wanted to go down there. It was down at the Taft Theater downtown. And he looked at his watch and he said, "Oh, it's too late now." But I had dressed the girls so they would be presentable. And I said, "No, it isn't. They'll have singing before and things." So we went. And that's how he got started going. And then we went every night until he had to go out of town, and I thought for a few days, and I thought, well, when he comes back, he will go. And Schaefer had been out there, maybe Duffield too, I don't know, and I wasn't there, and they left a note on the door. So I knew they were there. But when he came back, he did go from then on. And I had 4 little girls to get ready to go, and they were cavorting around in the back seat, and I said, "I'm going to get me a little stick, and I'm going to, the one that starts, it's going to get a little crack." But I was just threatening. I never touched them. It's mostly Sharon and Sherry too. But I said, "They're your nieces, I'm not going to touch them." But they got used to us, and they were pretty good little girls, weren't they? Although Sharon irritated Linda, and which kept her upset, because she was used to being the oldest, and Sharon was older than her. And she'd do things to torment Linda too. And one night they were working around upstairs making all kinds of noise, and I said, "You go up there and stop it, I'm not." So he took the fly swatter with him and went up there, but he couldn't catch up with them, I don't think.
I swashed all around with that fly swatter and never touched anybody.
Well, speaking of church, surely you played some practical jokes on fellow church members or pastors. Do you care to
No.
confess any now?
No, but one time I had to go to a meeting at Procter & Gamble, and those guys, a lot of them smoke cigars, especially some of the higher ups, you know, and this place in there where they had a meeting, it would just reeked of tobacco, you know, right? And that night I had to go to a church board meeting, and Elder Vessels was the pastor. And when I got there, I told him right off, you know, I said, I know I smell like tobacco. I said, but I've been in a meeting all day, and it's just, my clothes just smell that way, you know. So we were having a meeting, and things were going on, and Vessels speaks up and says, "Somebody in this room has been smoking." He says, "I definitely smell it. Now, who is it?"
At the church board meeting?
Guess he knew that I smelled that way, you know, and he was just doing it for a joke, you know.
He was raised Catholic, and he used to be an altar boy.
And
Vessels.
the Elder Hill was one of our pastors, and Lorene House was a member that we knew real well. And one time we were Lorene was at a grocery store, and I think we were there, weren't we?
Mm.
And
He was too.
and she went to go through the checkout line, and she started taking her stuff out, and here was this ham in her basket.
One of those little
cart, you
cottage
know.
hams.
And Elder Hill had to stick that, put that ham in her basket. He had to say, "Oh, I don't want this."
You remember any funny in-gathering stories?
Yeah. I remember one time when went up to someone's porch, and it was snowing, and I went to step off the porch, and I didn't notice they had a flower bed with wire in it, and I caught my foot in that wire and pitched out head first out into the snow. And I was kind of woozy. I got up and started walking towards the street, and I ran into a limb that was about the same height and knocked myself down. And then I went over a little further, and I fell over the little boy's sled. And finally I made it out to the street, and I told her, I think this fellow his name was Ashcraft or something like that. And I told him, you know, and he said, well, get on my back and I'll take your piggyback. And then also down in Hartwell one time, I went to, there was a church there, and the place where the pastor lived was right next door to it. I think it was a Presbyterian church. And I went up to the door and I told the pastor what we were doing, and he says, from me to you, you know, he gave me $5, and he was smoking a cigar. And I went out and I told this fellow Ashcraft, who was with us again, I said, that pastor was smoking a cigar. I said, he says, well, I just know it was a soybean cigar. I said, he gave me $5. He said, well, I just know it was a soybean cigar. And one time, we went over to Winton, Springdale, and it was Annis and I and Jake Walden and Skipper and a whole bunch of crew. And it started snowing just as we got there. Well, then we parked our cars along the street there, and it kept snowing, and we went all around through Springdale, Dead Gathering, and then we came back to the car, and I got my hand in my pocket. My keys weren't there, and then I had lost my keys. And I told Jake Wallen, I said, I've lost my keys. I don't have what to do. He said, let's have prayer. So we did. And then Jake went up the street like this, and he started kicking the snow, and he kicked my keys right up out of the snow. So ever since then, I always thought of a lot of Jake Walden's prayers, because he found my keys.
Mm-hmm.
Stories.
One bad thing that happened to us one time, though, when we were in gathering in Wyoming, and Linda Carroll went with us then. Linda was either ahead of us or behind us or something. We lost her.
Behind you.
She was
And Mother-
13 years old, and it was Christmas Eve.
And Mother says, I'm not going another step till we find Linda, you know. And really, we were really prayed. And
Those big houses, and those,
somehow or another, the police came by, didn't they? And
no, she walked down
Well, she
Wyoming
walked
Avenue, down to the drugstore,
yeah.
down Springfield Pike to Wyoming Avenue.
then
And
the
went in
police
there.
brought me back,
And she knew Waldens weren't home, she couldn't call them because they was with us. But she told the druggist, and the druggist said, I'll call the police, they'll find them. Well, I had said to Skipper, I don't see Linda anywhere. He said, oh, I think she's ahead of us. So we went a little bit farther, and I said, I still don't see her, and I'm not going another step farther till we find her.
Linda showed good judgment. She walked down to the drugstore.
Yeah, when I think I got held up at a house because they took quite a while, and I could hear the singing while I was still there, but then when I got done, I couldn't hear it anymore, and I couldn't find him.
Well, we'd gone over on the other street, next street. And that's when I said, I'm not going a step farther.
So I got to ride in the police car. Policeman came and picked me up and found him.
That ended our singing for the night.
Well, one time we were in Springdale, and it was icy, and I went up to somebody's door, knocked on the door, and they came to the door and they said, just a minute, I have to go get somebody, you know. And while they were gone, my feet slipped out from under me and I came down and wham! I hit real hard. And by the time they got back to the door, I was already back on my feet. Boy, it hurt. They didn't know it. It happened. But I hit the ground.
It was so cold you had to dress up like a teddy bear.
Yeah, we used to go
Try to
and
keep
sometimes
warm.
it was below zero. We'd go.
Yeah, I can remember going to the doors of some houses and getting ready to say my spiel, and my face, the muscles in my face would be so cold that I could hardly speak.
And we used to take them when they was so little that they were too little to solicit, even in the rain, but we still went and took them. They were just little kids.
Hey Mom, didn't you get lost in the store one time? Or something
Yes, she
downtown?
got lost in the store when she was 3 years old, down in Shelito's basement. I had gone down there they had diapers on sale, and I was expecting Carol. And they wouldn't, you couldn't call and have them send them out to you. You had to go get them. So I went down there to get them, and she was so little that you couldn't see her above these tables and so forth. While I was paying for them, why, she got away from me. And I kept going around and around, and I asked the clerks, did you see a little girl? No, they didn't, so they said, well, we'll call house security. So he came and they made me sit down. He says, you sit down, because we find her and then we can't find you. But he found her up, and I thought, oh, she's gone up the steps out on 7th and Elm Street, and somebody's grabbed her, and I was scared to death. But they found her up by the elevators. And I told them she had on a little blue dress. And they asked her, says, is your name Linda? She said, yes, and I can't find my mommy. So he come carrying her back there to the infants department. Where I was, well, I got her and we went home. I didn't do any more shopping. She was 3 years old.
Yes, and as my mother tells the story, that when she would take me shopping, I was quite the performer. And if she would miss me and see a group of people gathered somewhere, it would usually be I'd be in front of a mirror and I would be dancing.
We took to see Santa Claus one time at Sears, and people would go up, the little kids would sit on his lap or something, you know, and it came your turn, and instead of going to sit on Santa's lap, you started running around in circles like this, you know,
Well,
you'd run around and
She'd just go so close, and then she'd start.
yeah,
She
running
would-
around in circles in front of Santa Claus. Did good to get you to stop and sit on his lap. You laugh at him and then go around again. One of the oddest things that happened though was when Carol had her finger pinched.
Pinched, it was
We
practically cut off. The end of this
we were
finger.
painting. We were
Huh?
painting, weren't we?
You was painting
I
outside.
had on some old clothes and I had paint all over me. And some kids, when they were playing, and they turned the piano bench over, and Carol's finger was caught in the piano bench, and it
On
practically
the
cut
hinge
it.
side.
Yeah,
She
practically
had
cut
just
it off.
been in the kitchen. I had lunch ready.
We had to take her to the hospital,
Had to take her to Dr. Jones first.
Dr. Jones, and then he made contact with the surgeon, and then we had to take her to the hospital. And this doctor, they put her on the table, and here we was standing, I was in my old dirty clothes with all this paint all over me, and Dr. Wilson had her hand down and taped down, and he looked at that finger, and he just kept shaking his head. He just said, it's no use, you know, and
And I said, oh, yes, there is.
Yes, it is, and that's the little girl's
Right
figure,
hand.
right hand, you know. So he worked on it, and he sewed it back on, and
There was enough skin there that
it was,
let blood get to it.
and anyway, when we went back to the doctor's office, after that was over, and I was gonna pay him, and I said, how much do I owe you, doctor? And he said, is $35 too much? I said, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
I guess he was, I don't know, those paint clothes on, the way I looked, I guess he thought
I
it'd be.
had on the
Yeah,
worst
but they have
old shorts and
$35,
stuff
you know.
I had, I think. Oh, it was awful.
So
I
he
got
sure did a
Bill's
good
call
job.
Visit with him.
And
in
all
Parker.
that, you know, with the hospital,
Which one?
also, I guess the
You mean
hospital, we
coming out
had
of the
Blue
hospital?
Cross and Blue Shield and everything, the way I worked.
Oh, later on the next year in the spring, I had to take her down to Children's Hospital to test to see if she was a bleeder, because they was gonna remove her tonsils and adenoids. And she didn't wanna go, and I said, she says, I won't see Dr. Wilson. And I said, well, you don't know, you might. And then you could park right in front of the hospital, and we walked, parked there, and we walked up to the front door there, and the man came out and got in his car, and he sat there till we got up there close to him, and then he said, don't I know you? And I said, yes, you fixed Carol's finger late last summer. That's right, let me see your finger, Carol. So she showed him. He says, well, can't hardly tell it happened. But when he was doing it, he said, I don't need x-rays to see it's clear through bone and all. But when I saw that needle that he put through her finger, he looked up at me and he says, I guess I was pale. He says, maybe you better go out. I know. I said, no, I don't want to go out. I sat down. But they had her wrapped in a sheet so she couldn't move, only had this arm stretched out. And all the trials of childhood. I know another funny experience, but she might not like me to tell it. But she was just a baby being potty trained. We were in the car and I stopped at the drugstore, and I carried a little blue potty in the car with me. And while I was in the drugstore, she said she had to use it. So he sat it on his lap and set her on his lap on the potty. And when she got up, it stuck to her bottom and then spilled.
Oh, no.
I was gonna tell that, but I thought, well, I won't embarrass Carol.
Yeah, thank you.
And when I picked her up, she off of that, and then it just fell over.
Well, it wasn't a whole lot.
Well,
But he says, here I am always.
you better wash those hands.
We left that day when she got her finger hurt. We left the house unlocked. He didn't even have his billfold with him. That was awful. That was Gloria that was there with you. And you and Gloria knocked the piano bench over and was trying to pick it up, but you just had the lid. And she went in there and I don't know, got her finger in there.